Ever since the days of the Famicom, Fire Emblem has proven to be one of Nintendo's longest and most successful RPG series in the Japanese market. Western players wouldn't be introduced to the series until the Game Boy Advance, after the characters Marth and Roy made their overseas debut in Super Smash Bros. Melee. This slowly but surely perpetuated the series into garnering a huge following internationally. Fans debate over which game in the series stands out as the best, with Fire Emblem Three Houses for Nintendo Switch being a strong contender for many. A lot of the praise heaped on that game comes from its excellent writing and cast of diverse and interesting characters, many of which are students at the Officers Academy. With so many students with diverse personality traits, which ones stand out above the rest as the most moral in the game? I'm Kifinosi with One Up Binge, and this is Fire Emblem Three Houses Students. Good to most heroic. Before we start our list, let's establish some ground rules. We're talking about the students specifically and not all the characters in the game. Members of the Church of Seiros who are not students of the Officers Academy at the beginning of the game will not be accounted for. Secondly, many of the characters have different personality developments depending on which path the player chooses in Fire Emblem Three Fates. For several entries, we're going to be taking into account scenarios from the game's multiple paths in our rankings, as well as the changes in personalities they undertake as a result. In other words, this is our spoiler alert. With that said, let's dive into our list, starting with the least good and working our way up to most heroic. At the bottom of our list, we have the leader of the Black Eagles, Edelgard. When we first meet Edelgard, she is dignified, formal, and takes her role very seriously, rarely partaking in recreational activities or relaxing. While she definitely is an effective leader at first, the reason she ranks so low is due to her true nature being revealed later in the story. See, Edelgard has been secretly plotting to take over Fodlan and unite its three territories into one united empire. She has little regard for human life and views any sacrifices under her orders as necessary in accomplishing her goals. Edelgard despises nobles due to her and her siblings being imprisoned and experimented on as a result of the actions of the Church of Seiros. The game thankfully allows Byleth to choose to be on whichever side of the war they prefer. Due to her underhanded tactics and cruel actions, Edelgard's side would personally not be our first choice. Dimitri, the leader of the Blue Lions, is up next. While being a respectable leader and taking his position seriously, Dimitri is generally cheerful and hates formalities, preferring his allies speak frankly to him. Dimitri does have an underlying darkness to him, suffering from survivor's guilt from the tragedy of Duskur. This allows us to sympathize with Dimitri, but he arguably gets a little too vengeful as the story progresses. He develops a strong contempt toward Edelgard, plotting to murder her once he discovers her duplicitous nature. This causes Dimitri to become cold and ruthless, treating his former classmates as weapons for his cause. Despite this, he maintains his sworn rule of not killing for personal gain, proving he has a little more empathy than Edelgard. However, this doesn't prevent Dimitri from capturing and torturing his opponents. Dimitri has many honorable attributes, but his lust for revenge proves to be his undoing depending on which path the player decides to take. Next up, we have Felix from the Holy Kingdom of Fargus. A skilled swordsman who strives to be the best in Fodlan, Felix is very self-motivated, determined, and talented, all of which are points in his favor. On the other hand, when it comes to his teamwork and social skills, Felix leaves a lot to be desired. Felix is rude, impatient, and condescending toward most of the other characters, mostly stemming from him seeing others as obstacles in the way of his goals. He does show respect toward opponents and allies whom he considers to be at his skill level, but even that respect is somewhat backhanded as Felix uses it as motivation to train and surpass them. A part of us does respect Felix for always stating what's on his mind, but the character still demonstrates a lack of compassion at times, preventing us from ranking him any higher. Hubert is next on our countdown. A dedicated follower of the Black Eagles and Princess Edelgard, Hubert is shown to be a highly skilled warrior with a notable lack of remorse for the enemies he kills. He has a dark past due to his relationship with his father, who was a traitor to House Resvelg. After Edelgard executed Hubert's father for his traitorous actions, Hubert stated that his father had it coming and showed no regret nor mourning in response. This likely took a huge role into morphing Hubert into the heartless warrior he turned out to be. Hubert does have a lot of loyalty to his house and fellow classmates, which are definitely points in his favor, but it doesn't totally absolve him from his rough and threatening demeanor. Finding her way into our next spot is Leonie. Leonie grew up in a small village which was protected by poachers such as Geralt, causing Leonie to idolize the man. This led Leone to become very competitive with Byleth out of jealousy that Byleth is Geralt's offspring. Her attitude to Byleth changes after Geralt's demise, concluding that Geralt would prefer that Byleth and Leone work in unison toward the same goals. While her dedication to both her home village and Geralt is admirable, Leone loses some points for her inconsiderate and blunt speech. We can respect Leone for speaking her mind, but she often does so in inappropriate situations, when it may have been better to be reserved or tactful. Despite her faults, Leone is a determined warrior and shows a lot of honor toward those who inspire her. Lysithea finds her way onto the next entry on our list. Lysithea is a hard-working and determined person who tries her best to hone her skills. As a child, Lysithea was considered a magical prodigy due to her powers developing at a very young age. Because of this, many of Lysithea's friends and family consider her to be a natural talent when it comes to magic. This would seem like a compliment to many, but Lysithea surprisingly resents the notion, as people don't give her credit for the hard work she puts in to improve herself. If that wasn't bad enough, Lysithea's peers often treat her like an immature child due to her being the youngest student at the academy. Lysithea can be pretty irritable, but given the condescending attitude she gets from everyone around her, we can definitely understand and sympathize with her position. Next on our list is Hilda. Being raised as the youngest sibling of a respected and wealthy noble, Hilda is portrayed as lazy, somewhat selfish, and incredibly spoiled. She often will make up excuses to get out of strenuous group activities and will even manipulate others into doing chores for her. Still, when interacting with other students on most occasions, Hilda is quite friendly and even genuinely helpful when she wants or has to be. It's revealed that Hilda's laziness is actually a coping mechanism due to her brother always outperforming her as a child. This makes Hilda's lazy behavior more understandable, if not totally forgivable. What does really redeem her is her willingness to put her own life on the line to protect Claude during the war phase of the game, proving that she was much more than the entitled brat we initially believed her to be. Next, we have Dedue. Not much for words, Dedue is one of the quieter and more stoic characters in the game, which unfortunately leads to him being judged by others due to his intimidating figure. After being saved by Dimitri before the events of the game, Dedue swore loyalty to Dimitri and stood by his side ever since. This is certainly admirable, but we do see the negative downside to this as well, since Dedue often seems a little lost without Dimitri's guidance. Dedue's loyalty also extends to his other teammates, whom he admittedly protects mostly due to them being in service of Dimitri as well. He may take his loyalty overboard, but Dedue does show a great amount of honor for his actions. One of the most prideful nobles in Fodlan, Lorenz, is up next. Lorenz loves to inform everyone about his noble status and talks about how great he is as a result. While this causes certain people to label him as snobby and cocky, Lorenz does not deem himself as superior to his fellow classmates and always does his best to lend assistance when needed. Also, despite his high opinion of himself, Lorenz does take the role of being a noble very seriously and is often criticizing other nobles such as Claude, who has a more carefree attitude to his position. Lorenz goes as far as to monitor Claude's actions and choices. However, Lorenz is fair and eventually learns to trust Claude's leadership after many observations. Lorenz may have a big head and can be socially oblivious, but obviously he believes in honor and demonstrates that throughout the course of his journey. Up next, we have a warrior who loves women as much as his royal duties, Sylvian. While admired by his fellow students when he joins the academy, Sylvian's most defining characteristic at the beginning of the game is his womanizing nature. This unfortunately causes him a lot of problems, both with offending those he's pining after and forming a genuine relationship. It's even stated that Sylvian attempted to flirt with Ingrid's grandmother when he was only 8 years old, which is maybe more than a little creepy. As the game progresses, Sylvian becomes a much more honorable man, questioning his crest and choosing to live a life of free will. He's also shown to be a great father by the end of the game, treating all of his children with respect. Sylvian has one of the most interesting character arcs in the game, which is why, despite his initial shortcomings, we ultimately think he turned out for the best. Up next, we have a warrior hailing from the Adrestian Empire, Ferdinand. A prideful and somewhat cocky noble, Ferdinand is known for his competitive nature, often trying to prove himself as more capable than his fellow warriors, particularly Edelgard, whom he strives to outdo. As the game progresses, Ferdinand's prideful nature withers as he becomes humbled by the fact that, well, some people will just always be more adept than him on the battlefield. He's also shown to be very big on self-improvement and genuinely cares about strengthening his relationships with his mutuals, both for himself and the morale of the team. While Ferdinand is somewhat rough around the edges due to his inflated pride, ultimately we do think he has a good heart underneath his armor. Next up on our list is Ingrid. A hard-working and a determined woman, Ingrid wants to become the greatest knight imaginable and dedicates most of her time to achieving that goal. She's so determined that she neglects most activities outside of her training, such as her father's constant insistence for her to get married. A lot of her disdain for the idea of marriage stems from the death of her fiancé, Glenn, before the events of the game. This is also the reason for Ingrid's dedication to becoming a knight, aspiring to be a noble warrior like Glenn was. While she may not be the friendliest character in Fire Emblem Three Houses, Ingrid's past allows us to sympathize with her, and we definitely admire her determined attitude when it comes to living out her dreams. Marianne from the Golden Deer House comes into our next spot. Many nobles often let their positions go to their heads and create inflated egos. Marianne is the antithesis to that, being shy, insecure, and pessimistic in regards to both herself and the world around her. She considers herself a burden to others and avoids interacting with people as much as she possibly can. As the game progresses, Marianne gains more confidence in herself and lets go of her self-pitying nature, for the most part, showing a lot of growth. Marianne is also very religious and has a great appreciation for animals, both of which often bring out her softer side. We're glad Marianne got over her insecurities, because she's a very good-hearted person at the end of the day. Our next spot goes to Ignatz. A reluctant warrior who would prefer studying the arts, Ignatz studies becoming a knight to appease the wishes of his father instead of following his own aspirations. It's hinted at that he has low self-esteem at times and doesn't consider himself knight material. Despite this, Ignatz is generally cheerful and optimistic when interacting with others, especially Raphael, who was his best friend before they both went to the academy. Ignatz is friendly, patient, and hard to anger, usually becoming sad whenever confronted or berated by his fellow peers. Ignatz may not be the most passionate warrior, but his warm and friendly nature makes him a valuable asset to Fodlan's army nonetheless. Fighting his way into our next ranking is Caspar. Hailing from the Adrestian Empire, Caspar is known for his high-spirited and competitive nature. He holds a very strong sense of justice and hates seeing treatment he deems as unfair. While his actions do generally come from the right place morally, Caspar is somewhat oblivious to the true feelings of others. He's also known for having a short temper and jumping into action too hastily at times. Being prideful and courageous are certainly valuable aspects for a soldier to have, but Caspar's simple-minded nature does lend to make him miss important social cues, resulting in some unfortunate consequences. Resting in our next spot is Linhardt. A change of pace from the usual personality of his peers, Linhardt is crazy, carefree, and does his best to avoid conflict with his fellow classmates. He has a little pride for his own house and doesn't like to flex his abilities, despite being both highly skilled and intelligent. His apathetic attitude can be a negative trait at times, as Linhardt will occasionally fall asleep when someone talks about a topic that doesn't interest him. His questionable social skills aside, Linhardt does seem to care for his fellow students on some level. With so many prideful and arrogant warriors by his side, Linhardt's lighter attitude adds some needed levity to his team's character dynamics. Singing her way into our next spot is one of the most artistic members of our cast, Dorothea. An actress, musician, and warrior all at once, Dorothea is one of the more flirtatious students Byleth meets at the academy, always pining after a different man to take care of her for the rest of her life. While somewhat shallow on the surface, Dorothea reveals that her confidence in her beauty now stems from the fact that she believes she will age and become less desirable as the years go by. A victim of poor treatment from more rich families as a child, Dorothea has some deep-rooted insecurities underneath the overconfident mask she puts on for others. On the other hand, Dorothea shows a lot of empathy for neutral parties caught in the crossfire of battles, and stands up to anyone who treats her improperly. Despite Dorothea's prissy exterior, she ends up being one of the most admirable characters in the game due to her friendly and considerate nature towards those around her. Our next spot goes to Raphael from the Golden Deer House. More of a muscle man than a deep thinker, Raphael spends most of his time training and usually only shows up to class out of obligation. Raphael is friendly, casual, and easygoing in nature, which is commendable considering both his parents died when he was young. He is dedicated to becoming a skilled knight and will stop at nothing to achieve that goal. Raphael's also shown to have a loving relationship with his sister, who is the only remaining member of his family. He'll even go as far as to search Fodlan far and wide in order to give his sister a present she would like. Raphael may not be the best person to approach for an intellectually stimulating conversation, but he does make for a warm and reliable member of Fodlan's army. The medieval hikikomori Bernadetta hides in our next spot. Shy, antisocial, and afraid of her own shadow, Bernadetta is very skilled as a warrior, but less so with interpersonal relationships. Often found hiding in her room when she's not on the battlefield, Bernadetta is revealed to have a traumatic past relationship with her father, leading to her becoming fearful of people in general. This makes us feel a lot of sympathy for Bernadetta, who does seem to want to build genuine friendships with those around her. When she's not running away from her fellow peers, Bernadetta is shown to be friendly and playful once her timid exterior is lifted. It's a shame that her social anxiety gets the better of her, but overall, we find her to be one of the more moral and empathetic characters in the game. Stealing the next spot is the thief-turned-warrior Ash. The oldest of three brothers, Ash became the sole provider for his family at the age of 10 when his parents died from a disease. Not being able to provide for his brothers on his own, Ash resorted to becoming a thief to make ends meet. This is definitely a case where being a past criminal doesn't make us look down on Ash, especially considering the motivation behind his actions. In the present, Ash is very warm, friendly, and considerate toward his allies, always offering help or advice when needed. It is clear that Ash's past has shaped him into being a very selfless person, as well as a strong, independent warrior who wears his heart on his sleeve. Up next, we have Claude, the leader of the Golden Deer House. From the beginning of the game, Claude is portrayed as much more easygoing than the other house leaders, taking a much more lighthearted approach to maintaining his position. This does cause a few characters to deem him unfit as a leader, but despite this, Claude is quite effective in his role, likely due to having better social skills than Dimitri or Edelgard. Claude is also less vengeful and ruthless than his fellow leaders and prefers diplomatic resolutions as opposed to engaging in a bloody war with casualties. Claude's darker side comes out when he reveals a ploy to poison the other houses to give the Golden Deer an advantage in mock battles, but to his credit, he ultimately doesn't go through with the idea. Since he doesn't suffer from the corruption experienced by Edelgard and Dimitri, we can safely say that for our money, he stands out as the most moral of the three house leaders. Next on our list, we have the protagonist of Fire Emblem Three Houses, Byleth. Byleth serves as the player's customizable avatar in the game, meaning their gender, birthday, and even technically their name are the player's choice. For the sake of simplicity, we'll refer to the character by their canonical name of Byleth. Byleth is shown to be somewhat emotionally damaged, showing limited expressions, which makes it hard for many players to understand their feelings. Byleth developed a reputation for being a skilled but emotionless warrior, known for cutting through enemies with little to no visible remorse. This causes some of the characters to demonize Byleth, with other characters using them as a tool. Byleth becomes more expressive as they form bonds with other characters, mostly their fellow students, who will often confide in Byleth with their emotions. All of this makes Byleth an unusually multi-layered avatar character with a lot of emotional depth and development throughout the game. The Bronze Medal of Good goes to Mercedes. Like many of the other characters, Mercedes comes from a troubled past, with her father dying around the time she was born and her mother marrying a man who couldn't care less about her. This eventually caused Mercedes and her mother to run away and live in a church, causing Mercedes to become very religious. Mercedes still practices her faith regularly and is portrayed as a caring, noble, and selfless individual, always putting the needs of others in front of herself. This does lead to Mercedes being somewhat passive at points in confrontations with her peers, but she does stick up for herself when needed. Overall, Mercedes' positive attitude and extremely caring nature easily rank her in the top 3 in terms of pure morality. Right above Mercedes, her best friend Annette takes home the silver medal. An incredibly book-smart girl who excels at her academic studies, Annette is also shown to be quite clumsy when not in the classroom, often making mistakes and tripping over barrels. Annette shares a lot of traits with Mercedes, most notably her peppy, upbeat attitude and caring nature toward everyone around her. She is yet another student with a difficult past, suffering from abandonment issues from her father's actions. Despite that, Annette is shown to still care about her father and can't bring herself to completely resent him once the two are united later in the game. Annette is forgiving, sweet, and very protective over Mercedes, all traits which allow us to give her second place on our countdown. The gold medal of Most Heroic goes to the final warrior from the Adrestian Empire, Petra. Petra was actually a native of Brigid before the Adrestian Empire captured her as a political hostage. Petra is not a native speaker of the Fodlan language, leading her to make many grammatical mistakes in her speech. She is, however, very insistent on improving her skills not only with language, but as a warrior. Much calmer than many of her peers, Petra is shown to have the patience of a saint and rarely gets upset with the other students. She may not be a Fodlan native, but Petra's strong work ethic and integrity make her not only a valuable asset, but the most moral character in Fire Emblem Three Houses. That about does it for our list, but before we go, let's award some honorary medals to these wonderful students. The Darwin Medal would have to go to Dedue. While not the most inept in terms of academic studies nor combat, Dedue is completely lost without Dimitri's guidance. This shows that Dedue doesn't have much of a mind of his own and is used to following orders. The Pride Medal is a tough one, since many of these nobles are very prideful. Out of all of them, though, Ferdinand likes to flaunt his status the most, so we'll let him have it. The Wrath Medal goes to Dimitri. Dimitri lets his anger and vindictive side consume him in several paths, leading to extremely tragic results. The Gluttony Medal goes to Raphael. It is stated in the game that Raphael loves meat and consumed quite a bit of it in the past, likely leading to his muscular body he has today. The Sloth Medal is going to Hilda. Even though Linhardt is possibly narcoleptic, Hilda actively goes out of her way to avoid doing work as much as possible and often manipulates others into doing chores for her. The Lust Medal is awarded to Edelgard. It may seem like an odd choice, but Edelgard's lust for power and fixation on becoming the ruler of the entire country is unparalleled by any of her contemporaries. We'll also give her the Greed Medal too, since it would obviously benefit her very well financially if her goals are to be met. But let us know in the comments section if you agree with our ranking, and tell us what we should cover next. If you need a one-up, remember to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist, where we break down the moralities of the characters in your favorite games. Thanks for watching!